There's our music, Anthony. You know what it means.
We're back.
We're back.
We are back.
Yes.
With a special guest.
Yes. We've got a +1 this week.
Nice.
Kyle Lintner.
Special.
So our friends at K Ratio lent
Yeah.
us Kyle for the afternoon.
I'm here on lease.
Yeah. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So Kyle, you've spent a lot of time dealing with freight, right?
Yeah, a lot of times. It's 19 months total.
19 months.
Long enough.
Yeah. So, we've had a pretty crazy run here in the last 19 months.
The 19 months I've been been crazy. Yeah.
So tell me about that. Like, what was your, what was that like? I mean, entering the space and then being like, hey, was this normal? Is it not normal?
Why is this different? I mean, I came into this June 18.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can all think back to that, rates were a lot different.
Quite a bit different.
Things
so
looked a lot different.
You came in at the top.
Right. And things were crazy. And I thought, oh, this is great. This is an industry with volatility and it's busy. And everyone's, well, not everyone, but if you're a carrier in a 3PL, you're probably making a lot of money.
Right.
And then, fast forward 6-7 months later and things are a lot different.
Right.
And then fast forward to today and things are different from 18, but similar to 19.
Sure.
Rapid movement in the cycles.
Yes, quite a bit. So tell everybody kind of, well, first of all, I guess we should welcome everybody to Freightonomics.
Yeah, we're here.
Yeah, this is where we talk about freight and current conditions and relate it to the economic cycles
Yeah.
of the United States of America and sometimes the world.
Currently, you're battling, what is this, SAD?
Yes, SAD, seasonal affective disorder.
Okay.
With these lights?
Not in here. Anthony helps me also.
I try to keep it pretty chipper.
Do you guys have a hard time falling asleep at night if you've been in here for a while?
I wear sunscreen too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a plus.
Yeah. And today we're going to cover, a plethora of topics.
Yeah.
Mainly covering these cycles of the economy and the freight market itself and how they are sometimes, a little disconnected.
Mm-hmm.
We have these things called freight recessions.
Yeah.
What you were talking about just a minute ago, Kyle, was not a freight recession. But it did inspire what we did label a freight recession last year, 2019. And, Anthony, if you want to, let's just dive right into what a freight recession is.
Let's do it. So looking at a freight recession, knowing what a recession is in general, one of the textbooks conditions for a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of contraction and a particular metric. And so that's going to be our gauge here. And so when we're looking at a freight recession versus a typical economic recession, they're not quite the same because when we're looking at the general economy, when we're looking at GDP, that's going to be measured on gross domestic product, which is really heavily favored to services and the consumer side of things.
Right.
We're looking at the freight side, that's going to be more geared towards industrial segments. And really, we're looking at 2 consecutive quarters, Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, of contraction we're looking at freight volumes.
Yeah, and we look at it from a year-over-year perspective.
Yeah.
It's got to be year-over-year growth because the freight market is extremely seasonal.
Right.
I don't know if everybody knows, but there's quite a bit of regularity in terms of the seasonal movement. But the difference is that sometimes those peaks and valleys are higher and lower.
Yeah.
So that's the big difference. And I think most of us have agreed that it's more of a demand side thing. So freight volume, as it increases or contracts, that's really what we drive that off of. Even though spot rates, which is something you've grown.
Yeah, and that's an important point. Everybody always wants to attribute these things to price when really it should be measured in volume.
Right.
It should be about demand. That's what's really dictating if it's a recession or not, because price is independent of what's going on, especially if we talk about things like the U.S. economy. We're going to translate that into freight. All we should care about is how much freight is being moved, not at what rate.
Right. And the prices are also very sensitive to things like, single surges or, like spikes in demand or weather. Hurricanes, for instance, are one of the single biggest contributing factors to price side, increases. So I think that's a very important thing to note is that it's not in the freight economy. When you're talking about, everybody's like, well, what's wrong with you? You work in trucking. And it's, we're not in a recession. It's not, it actually does, we're totally insulated from that service side, to a point. And the when we're not making as much stuff, which we're not making as much stuff, but we do import quite a bit.
We imported a good deal.
A lot.
Yeah. So that does lend itself to creating these volatile market spikes. So, so we're not in a freight recession right now. We did, by our measurements, come out of one here in the last half of 2019, and we are starting to see that impact in the spot market.
Right.
Kyle, you've watched this quite closely over the last several months. What are some of the things that you're noticing that's different in the back half of 2019 versus 2018?
Well, one thing, and I'd like to get both of your perspectives on this. This is an idea that plays out in my mind. Part of me thinks that where we are with rates could be the new normal. Maybe we don't see a return to 18 or 17 in prices because, obviously, capacity. Let's ignore that for this right now. The increase in efficiency from automation, from digitization, lower overhead as far as workforce is concerned, those all contribute to the overhead and the bottom line of a carrier or even a 3PL. So if that's removed, or at least a portion of that's removed, the rate supplied to the customer is different and now lower. Maybe we're all just moving better now at these prices, and this isn't, I know we were talking about freight recession in terms of volumes, but from a price standpoint, maybe this is the way that it is. And what happened from 18 to 19 that forced it was just something that we have to deal with. And now from 2020 and beyond, we're going to have to figure out how to make things work with these prices that we have.
And that's an interesting point too, because normally, we're all, in the rest of the economy, Anthony, you can dive in on this one. We kind of we've grown accustomed to CPI and PPI. Mm-hmm. It's a constant 2 to 3% year over year increase.
Yeah.
You just expect it's inflation.
Right.
And, in the freight market, having been in it for 15 years and run pricing for a long time, it does not seem to be on that same pattern. We were lucky to net 1% in flat years or even up years. we were happy to get, because it's so competitive.
Right.
And it is so, especially in your contracted accounts. Now the spot market's a totally different story, which depending on your exposure to that is extremely volatile on day-to-day activity. But that's something that I don't, I think you're onto something in terms of the new normal. But we have seen a few things change here in the last couple of years. That 2018, was a year that everybody just considers an anomaly.
It is. But that's part of my thinking is let's take everything pre-ELD and just forget about it.
Right.
Because you could have been running your truck for 20 hours a day and no one knows.
Right.
Now that we're all operating under the same guidelines, we have some decent standardization across the industry. Now we can begin to make the ideas and the conclusions and come up with these discussions about what is a real good price, what is an effective price, what's a fair market value, instead of company A staying within the rules and charging this and then company B not.
Right.
That's artificial capacity, and that's been removed from the industry. So now maybe moving forward, maybe 2019 beyond, we get something more similar to CPI or PPI where we get 0.5% increase a year just as a standard COLA basically for freight. Prior to that, who knows? Throw anything out there.
Well, so again, speaking from a pricing analyst side of things, I always want the rate increase.
Yes.
And so I was really cheesed off every time I didn't get my 2 to 3% cost of living increase.
Everybody likes a rally, right?
Yeah. So I and again, I think this 2018 left its mark in a different way. Not necessarily on everybody just thinks it's an anomaly. It'll go back to the way it was. Prices have not come all the way back down from pre-2008 to pre-2018 levels. And I think that's a byproduct of costs having increased. I think there's simply there's going to be these barriers to, these bottoms that you cannot go down below. Like carriers are going to do the math and say, well, pre-2017, 18, it cost me, this amount of money to own a truck. Well, all those people that experienced this robust economy in 2018, they took their rate increases. Yeah. And then they passed them along to the carrier.
Right.
So the carrier's math is now going to have increased by all those figures. And unless you have a true economic recession, which we're not in, they're not going to, they're not going to just pull those back.
Right.
Like not in freight. Freight, they'll pull back. Like carriers are stupid. I've been a carrier and I can say that. It's kind of like the Seinfeld episode where it's the dentist jokes.
Never seen an episode.
Yeah. Well,
what?
Oh my.
Yeah.
God. You know what?
Not time for that yet, right?
We're not in the last part of the show.
Right,
so
right.
We can't
anger everyone.
We can't upset the rest of the world.
Also, real quick, I am watching LinkedIn and YouTube, so the comments are up. So if you have any questions for Zach, myself, or Kyle here, feel free to voice those, and we'll get to it.
Yeah, especially on that carriers are stupid comment. I expect a few of those. And again, I'm saying this because I was a carrier, and I did get involved in those discussions quite often. And, we didn't really, take advantage of opportunities because we were so beat down by this mentality that, hey, we have to go lower. We have to get our costs lower and just push them down because the market is so competitive. And again, there's a lot of truth in that. You can't, when you are operating in an environment where most of your capacity is competition, you don't have much of a choice. Right. But there are things that you can do to, help yourself get through those, especially by differentiating yourself, becoming a little bit different, investing in technology. But there's also things, I don't know, Kyle, if you've heard about this, but FreightWaves has something called Freight Futures. There's
I was in the hallway walking down here, and somebody asked if I had heard of it. Could you explain it to me? No, so, that's tools or technology that needs to be adopted, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, even if you don't adopt like technology or something, now we're in an environment, we're in an economy where there's so much innovation, there's so much happening there, and if you're just sitting there and not, and I'm not going to try to turn this into a commercial or anything like that, but I think it's, as a finance guy, I grew up in finance. My dad was a stockbroker, and I was a finance major. Never thought I'd end up in trucking, but I did. But it's a fascinating space, really. But the fact that we have figured out a way to tie in, this financial instrument to trucking itself is amazing to me. Now, you've had a lot of, you've put a lot of work into this. You guys, kind of ride hard for the futures flag here. And
we do.
And, I'd like to hear your take on, what you've seen here over the last year or so, and, a lot of times people are, they look at these instruments and they've seen trading spaces or something like that, and they get real nervous.
That's usually how it goes.
Yeah. So, it kind of shines some light on like what a freight future is and how people can potentially use this item, especially, if you're not investing in technology, but this is not something that requires that kind of investment.
It isn't. It's pretty straightforward. It's at the end of the day, pretty simple. It's not that complex. We're just trading the price of a truck from A to B, really. So if you're a shipper or a carrier or a 3PL, you are fixing and locking in the rate that truck will go for, whether you're paying it or receiving it. And we're talking about something that's 5 to 14% cost of goods sold for a shipper. If you're a carrier or a broker, it's 100% of your revenue. Why you would want to let that float is beyond me. So this product you can do every single month for up to 16 months, effectively locking in what you're going to pay or receive. It's an almost no-brainer. This truthfully exists in every other industry. It just hasn't existed in freight for some of the troubles and the problems that are in freight, but you guys figured it out. You standardized and commoditized this space, and that monumental task has allowed for now proper risk management instead of this poor practices of just letting stuff float and saying, whatever comes.
Yeah, because they're technically, you're at the mercy of the market movements as it stands today. Now, as a person,
an extremely volatile one, right?
Exactly. And again, we've seen that pendulum swing both directions violently over the last couple of years. We went from the most robust freight market in at least that I remember, to one of the softest ones in 2019. Now, it wasn't necessarily that demand contracted that much. We did see a softer year in general, but I think the fact that everybody got so hyped up, the rates went up so fast. I think it was a 20 to 30% increase on the spot side.
Yeah, 36%, I think.
So you would know it better than me. And then we almost erased almost all of it. In a year.
And that's a good point. So here, the market responded exactly how it's supposed to, right? Price is just a mechanism to display the supply and demand. And if we get the price so high, we're supposed to respond as an industry with more trucks. Yeah. That's exactly what's supposed to happen. The problem is this market is so fragmented and there's no communication or there's no standard procedure across the board that nobody knows what their neighbor is doing.
Yeah.
So everybody decides, well, I'm going to order 50 new trucks when maybe they should have ordered 20.
Right.
Too many trucks show up, and then obviously everybody over the other side of the boat too quickly, price corrects. negatively, but it didn't behave in a way that it shouldn't.
No.
We needed more trucks. We got too many trucks.
Yeah, it's a natural equilibrium.
Right. And that's an ancillary benefit that futures that you don't actually have to even participate in them to take some of the benefits from it. If you have a mechanism that is displaying price to you, and you can see reasonably what you could receive for your trucks, you can make better judgments and better decisions with your company as far as what you're going to acquire from an asset standpoint. And then even if we're going to get one step further into funding it, well, now if you can lock in those revenues, you can reasonably have the money to pay for the trucks when they show up instead of just turning back like everybody did.
And you're almost guaranteeing the fact that you're going to make X amount of dollars based on your activity.
That's exactly what it is.
And that's, from a budgetary standpoint. So I used to make budgets back in the day as a financial analyst, and the budget process
wizardry
is just awful.
Yeah.
And most people that I know that I've talked to, maybe there's somebody out there that's figured this out a little bit more scientifically than me, but end of the day, you have so many line items that you have to go through, so many things that you got to project, and you can get all of your expenses to the penny. But the one thing that I've never seen anybody get right is the revenue side. And they cannot forecast their revenue effectively over the course of a year.
Right.
And the further you get into the year, the harder it gets, the further away from your budgets.
Yeah.
My wife's a physical therapist. She goes through the exact same process. And towards the end of the year, I remember her talking about it last year, like, well, our budgets are I'm 10% below budget. And I'm like, well, let's just see where they did the wrong math. And they had projected growth somewhere that didn't materialize back in June.
Right.
And of course, now the line has gone further astray.
Yeah.
And that happens in the carrier side and the shipper side all the time. You guys nobody can really foresee.
Right. And the shippers too, from the other side.
Yeah.
Then when they project their expenses.
Carrier and shipper side, all businesses, brokerage, all of them go through this budgetary process because they have to make one, even though I can't stand the practice itself. But you all make one because that's how you forecast how you're going to spend your money, how you're going to reinvest in your company, how you're going to grow. A lot of us have investors that we need to hit certain targets for, but at the end of the day, you need a goal to set. And
something to work
towards, and you need to figure out a way to measure yourself against that goal. And, futures to me is a beautiful way of really targeting, that revenue item.
That's very accurate.
And that revenue item, and on the shipper side, that cost target, because every transportation manager I talk to on the shipper side is not overly concerned about how much they're spending on any individual load.
Right.
They're more concerned about, well, I had this budget to hit 4% of cost or 4% of revenue, and I'm worried about being over or under it. Right. Futures, of course, is like the answer to that.
How many times did you hear we were over budget, so I didn't get my bonus, or I got fired? Worst case.
Yeah, and so
easily avoidable.
Yeah, and this is a financial instrument that you can you can use to hedge yourself against all that.
Not hedging is the risky behavior.
Yeah. It makes no sense that, especially if you have the opportunity. I think I was talking to some carriers last year. So, last year, 2019, we came into, and I have to get used to saying last year a lot because we're so fresh in 2020. We were coming out of 2018. Again, everybody thought it was really robust. Did you run into, what were some of the challenges with explaining, that, hey, we're coming out of this super robust cycle? Did you get a lot of feedback on
I know.
Hey, this maybe isn't the right time for me to do this? And yet, if you understand the instrument, it was actually the exact right time to do this.
Yes. Carriers were very hesitant to lock it in. Everyone thought that there would be a recovery. Let me just get to produce season. Let me get to summertime. We'll get a jump in rates. Everything will be fine. It'll be like 18 all over again. And one of the unique aspects of this product is that all seasonality is already priced into the forward curve. So we all know that price of a truck in June is more than it is in March.
Right.
That's already there. We don't change the calendar and price just immediately jumps. All the seasonality is baked in, but what I tried to remind carriers at the time was that you need that seasonality. This is something that you need to have to maintain your business. If this price that's baked in doesn't materialize, now you're losing money. Your revenues are decreasing. This isn't about making money. This is about removing losses. That is the whole goal with futures. This is not a way to grow your account. We're not trying to make money inside of the market. You grow your business by removing the risks and removing the losses inside of it. And that's all this is at a time. And you and I were speaking earlier off camera about this. That seasonal bump in the summer was already priced in.
Yeah.
And it didn't materialize.
Right.
So if you were a carrier, you're running your business at somewhere between 18 and 19 prices while everybody else is doing it 10 to 15 cents lower a mile. That is beyond a competitive advantage.
To me, it doesn't compute that you don't jump in on that. I think it was kind of like, here, take my money.
Pretty much.
And
so then the interesting part of that is then when I make that argument, then sometimes they'll ask, well, then why does the shipper do it? The shipper doesn't care. The shipper just wants to know what they're paying.
Mm-hmm.
If you tell them, hey, you got to pay 10 cents extra a mile, but I guarantee no fail, this is your absolute cost on something.
Right.
Every shipper says yes.
Yeah. And that's a perfect example. Like, so, the story of the show is the freight recessions.
Yeah.
And, the rest of the economy is doing fine. Mm-hmm. We've talked about our friends, the consumers, that are helping us out through some of these,
hardships.
Industrial production.
Yeah. The American consumer is resilient.
Yes, extremely resilient. And so when that happens, that means that, these shippers are the ones that are deriving a lot of their revenue from the consumer side. Mm-hmm. So legitimately, they're up there having a good time, but they're worried about, locking in their budgets. Yeah. And that's what that number one priority for the transportation departments. And because their business is not in transportation, it's in something else entirely. However, the trucking companies, the carriers out there, this is their business. This is what makes them whole every year, are these revenues. And, coming into a softer market is one of the worst things ever for a carrier.
I think especially when you're looking for, I guess, those new carriers that just came online during the 2018 and thinking this is normal. And so, as you mentioned, those are, when we're finding that new balance, those that are going to be able to really be successful in this new freight industry are going to be those that are taking advantage of new technologies, new innovations. But I can only imagine someone coming in 2018 like, oh, this is amazing. Why have I been doing this for years? Yeah. And then transitioning into 2019 like, hey, what's going on here?
I have that conversation all the time. I try and ask people that, or remind them, just because this price isn't something you're comfortable with doesn't mean that somebody else isn't.
Yeah.
So you might not think $1.60 or whatever a mile for a lane is something that you can run your business at.
Yeah.
But Joe Smith down the street can.
Yeah. And I think that's really where experience really kind of comes in a factor, because those that have been experienced and in this industry for so many years are going to have no problems making money in an up or down freight industry. They're going to be just fine. It's going to be those newcomers that just got in at 2018 or maybe they just got in at 17 or something like that are thinking, what do I do now? How do I make my money? And where do I go from here? So
because they ran their budgets at $2.10 a mile, and now it's $1.60.
Right.
They earmarked when they were buying the trucks. We'll get 10 more trucks, and we're getting $2.10 a mile on average for it.
Right.
No,
so they have some, but at the same time, they can, like you said, they can run on a lot lower overhead. They don't have that cost burden. Although those newer trucks did get increases. If you went out and bought a new truck, which I don't think a lot of the smaller guys do, they buy used truck prices, which again have gone down dramatically over the last several months. Now, we were a little worried about our 3-year used truck price early on in the 2019. And this is another point that I think that needs to be said out there, is that sometimes we all see and feel the softening of a market before, you see the full effect of it. It's a very slow process to see things retract, come back down to earth, come out of these super overheated spots. Sometimes we see the overheating real fast, but it almost operates on a wave. It's like you got to ride the wave for a little while, and it slowly.
Would you say a freight wave?
A freight wave. Pun not intended, but well done. And we saw this expansion continue into 2019, whereas we were like, why would you do that? You don't stop spending money. But used truck 3-year-old prices kept going up through June of this year. And we're all kind of like going, I remember doing a little research on it back in February, and everybody's like, you're an idiot. There's no way people are buying trucks right now. Well, I was like, well, that's what the data says. And they propped up those prices because think about the cycle of big spending. You don't decide to buy a car on a whim.
Yeah.
You think about it for a little while. You're like, I can get a few more, years out of this thing. I can get you a few more months out of this thing. And then all of a sudden you're saving up over time. You go out, you buy the car. you don't care what the economy's doing right then.
Yeah.
You had that target, that goal to go buy that thing. And that's exactly what people do in trucking or in business. They save up, they target their, expansion, if you will, or entering the market, and then they go do it.
Yeah.
What happens when they're in there, they're almost like, oh, well, now I'm here.
Yeah.
Now what?
Now what? Exactly.
And I think a big part of it is not just in trucking, but we've seen it just play out, but also in just business cycle. When there's an expansion, people are making the wrong moves at the wrong time. It's like things are great. I'm not prepped for any kind of contraction or slower growth. But by the time that they're planning for this expansion to take advantage of it, it's already way too late. And now they're stuck in a bad position when things slow down. And so it's like a really reactive.
Goes late to the party.
Yeah.
The
always.
easiest way when I have those conversations to explain that to people is housing.
Yeah.
So those that bought their house really late in the cycle
and
got stuck underwater with it. It's the same thing here with trucks. And the other interesting dynamic, and this will be familiar to you, a lot of those smaller carriers are the people that have fewer trucks. They don't have access to contract business, which usually pays more. They got to deal with broker loads, and the broker doesn't pay them what they're receiving for the contract. They pay them what the spot market rate is. So now in 2019 and in 20, that's a pretty low rate. So not only did you add your truck at the wrong time, but you're getting a lower rate for it.
Much lower.
Yeah.
You're kind of getting it on both ends.
The perfect storm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, Anthony, we've kind of talked about how the economy didn't go into a recession as a lot of people predicted it would here towards the end of the year. We kind of be in this holding pattern overall. Retail did great.
Yeah.
I think you hit all of your predictions this year.
I went 3 for 3 for my releases. Yeah. So
It's beyond Hall of Fame.
I know.
Yeah.
I don't want to ever do it again. It's like, how do I do
It'll be
it?
0 for 3 next.
Exactly.
So recap what you got right.
So I got retail sales right. So I think that was a pretty easy one, especially kind of looking at our most recent holiday trends. I got housing starts. I think that was a shocker for many, just because housing starts have been up and down, up and down. I think because that supply side is so weak compared to the demand side, one of the things I love talking about, the home purchasing sentiment index. My buddies at Fannie Mae. I love feelings. I love sentiment. So knowing that the demand side was so strong was really what prompted my I guess, inkling that home housing starts are going to increase in the next month. Also, one of the other things that happened in December was kind of unseasonably warm. So that really allowed for more activity as well. The other thing I got right was industrial production going down.
Well, that's not a big shock.
It's not a big shock, but people were shocked for some reason.
No, I remember you saying that last week.
Yeah,
You
people were really shocked for some reason, especially with the further contraction in the PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index. So, 3 for 3.
So what do you think that's going to do here leading into the first half of the year? I mean, we're the industrial side weak, housing market still strong, retail strong, but it's not the retail, and we're not quite to that housing
it's
time of the year.
not that season just yet. And so I think it's really going to start us off with a slow start to 2020, especially when we're looking at manufacturing. There are some small little shining lights that I can kind of
always
see
looking
there.
for the optimism.
I'm looking for that. I'm searching hard for those optimism. And so when I find difficulty in finding those little shining stars, that's when I know, like, all right, it's a little tough out here.
Yeah.
So one of those shining stars I think is going to come from non-defense capital goods new orders, so business-to-business activity. I'm thinking that might come a little bit, gain some momentum in the coming months, and so I think that might come online by the second half of 2020.
Okay.
But when you're looking at industrial production, when you're looking at manufacturing new orders or the PMI, new orders have been contracting for some time, and that's going to give you a forward outlook of what's going to happen in manufacturing. And so seeing what's happening with new orders, those declining. When you're down on new orders, you start drawing from your backlog. Those are also coming down. And it's not really being there's not a lot of catalysts except for, we had the phase 1 deal. So that might spur some activity here. But there haven't been a lot of catalysts. And I don't see any catalysts really coming online until really late second quarter into that mid-2020 timeline. So that's really going to put a lot of emphasis on the consumer side, if there wasn't enough already. But at the same time,
max out the credit card.
Exactly, and that's the bad thing. We want to play both sides. We want the consumer to be spending, but we don't want them overextending themselves, and now they're in a poor place. And so,
Literally.
yeah, literally, literally. And so those are going to be the trends I'm going to be watching in the first half of 2020. But I definitely expect a slower start to the year.
Yeah, I don't think that's a hard thing to see, at least at this point. We are seeing, again, back to the whole idea of the freight recession. You need 2 consecutive quarters of contraction. Arguably, the traditional cycle for a freight recession lasts anywhere from about, you've got, I think most of them last for a period of 6 to 19 months, I believe is the range. And we saw roughly a 6 to 9 month one, depending on who you look at. In terms of our data, it was for sure 6 months, but I think you can argue a 9 month in there as well. So we were on the low end of what we would call a freight recession. In terms of what that happens, but at the same time, our recovery hasn't been quite robust.
Muted.
Yeah, it's
and that's why I kind of drift into that. Maybe this is the new normal.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't take a lot to send the market into it.
That's true. Right.
I mean, we saw that in 2018. So the previous freight recession, 2016-ish, in that range, that whole year was really. It actually started at the end of 2015. And lasted through most of 2016. Probably towards the end of 2016 is when you really started to see some actual year-over-year positive. And that was about a 12-month cycle. And, arguably early 2017 wasn't great. It took.
No, you're right.
Yeah, it took a while to get those volumes. They got easier comps. So it technically wasn't a freight recession in early 2017, even though the market did not feel that way. Rates weren't going up. A lot of people confuse rates, again, going back to that theme, with the, if you're making $2.20 a mile versus the $1.60 you made last year, no, the hurricane did not pull you out of a bad ongoing situation. But, we did have those 2 hurricanes, and we had that produce season that year was tremendous. You got in right on the tip of that. And I guess it was 2017 that the produce season was tremendous, and then 2018 was a product of just a super hot market. And the economy, all that capital expenditure stuff really spurred on the economy with the tax breaks, tax benefits. A lot of companies invested in the future, and we just don't have that this year.
Right.
We're not seeing actually on more of that uncertain ground, especially with it being an election year, depending on where you land on that side. But most people don't want to take a big risk.
Right. I think there are more uncertainties than certainties right now. And in my opinion, when you have less that is known, that's deflationary in price. If you're in your old role trying to budget and plan, and there's less that you have to deal with from a certainty level, you're going to be a little more cautious and conservative with what you're doing. That's not expansionary.
Right.
That might play in. You can then make the argument maybe that means people start cutting back on purchases of new trucks. Maybe we do decrease capacity. I don't know, but that's counterintuitive because then maybe we're decreasing in volumes as well. The 2 play out in any way, in any scenario you want to think of, but I don't know of anything for sure that says we are moving higher in rates. If anything, I think there are more arguments to be made that this is it, or maybe 19 or 20 looks more like 19 than the modest recovery people are seeing.
Right. I think what we're on
from a price standpoint.
Sure, for sure.
But even from a volume, can we really think that 2020 is going to have greater volumes than 2019?
It's hard to see. One of the arguments that people are making, though, is that since people took 2019 off from spending money, especially on capital expenditure, they're going to eventually have to spend their money, and it's not necessarily going to be seen on the front end of 2020, but more the back end.
Yep.
Which makes sense. I'll buy that, just in terms of knowing that that's legitimately how we used to operate.
Yeah.
And my experience.
You got the money earmarked for it. You got to use it or lose it.
Yeah, you don't want to, you don't just sit on it. I mean, you can pay out bonuses, but that doesn't do your company any good, really.
Right.
I mean, it makes everybody happier. But at this point in time, unemployment rates so low.
Yeah, around 3.5, I think.
So that actually might not be a bad move for some of those companies. But again, the bonuses themselves, everybody starts to think once you get a high bonus, they expect it. It's like you set the baseline at this high area. So it's actually better to improve some more long run, benefits and things like that help people, increase their salary a little bit. Don't necessarily give them a one-time payout, but bump up their consistent salary. You actually can save money that way.
Yeah.
Instead of taking your windfall and being like, hey,
yeah,
even though I all know it's a one-time thing.
Yeah, and other benefits, just making the workplace a happier place, and really kind of helping with that retention, because we're seeing with this low employment rate that consumers are confident, and they're feeling confident about finding other positions, and so they are
the turnover cost with new employee hire.
You talk to a lot of brokers out there.
I do.
So what are you hearing about? It is the attrition rates at brokerages are super high.
Yeah, this is true.
And like, are you seeing or hearing anything that's changing that? Have you heard any like real cool ways that people are trying to combat that? Or
some of the more forward-thinking brokerages try and repurpose or take someone whose position maybe isn't needed or is no longer necessary and put them in a different department or something just to retain them. Nobody wants to really fire anyone.
Sure.
But, for the reasons that we were talking about earlier with this increase in automation, there is some redundancies in some departments, not to mention the recent trend of offshoring or nearshoring, whatever you want to call it. That's picking up steam. So when the margins are being compressed and the revs are coming down, companies start making cuts in personnel and in headcount. I have heard of a lot of the people we talk to, they do try and repurpose, but some are flat out letting them go. And then, what plays out in my head is the question of, are these people ever going to return to the freight workforce, or are we now moving in an area where that position isn't necessary anymore?
Sure.
We can think of all the companies that we know of that are doing automated matching and automated quoting. Okay, you're removing the human component. That person from carrier sales doesn't need to come back now. That person on the pricing desk doesn't need to come back now. They used to, maybe you could go down to the accounting department, but that's in Columbia.
Right. Do you think that's going to catch, do you think that momentum's going to carry forward? Do you think they can legitimately keep that going?
Well, if enough people are doing it, if enough companies are employing these tasks, I shouldn't use employing as a word, I guess, in the sense. If you're lowering your overhead and then you can offer a cheaper rate to the customer and still survive as a business profitably, your competition has to do something or do the same. Unless something changes, it's keeping up with the Joneses.
Right. Wow. Yeah. So
margins are coming down. I can say that with certainty.
Oh yeah, we've seen it. I mean, all across the board. Yep. We watched C.H. Robinson, go through their thing, and other brokerages as well. It's not a secret at this point that the spot market's a lot cooler. Revenues are down across the board. We're getting guidances from all of the bigger companies before earnings saying like, hey, guys, don't expect a big fourth quarter result from us. We saw it in our tender rejection rate. So my two predictions for the week, which are of course my two specialties, the tender volume and tender rejection.
Yeah.
I was right technically.
Yeah.
But I'm actually going to pull back a little bit and give myself a half point.
Okay.
On the rejection side, just because we were down, but we weren't down significantly. Like capacity did not loosen like I thought it would here in the first part of the week.
Yeah.
We're still coming out of that Christmas, that holiday thing. A lot of drivers are still like they're on furlough or they're just not operating at this point in time. A lot of carriers will send people into, paid leave, if you will, to an extent, just to keep their operating costs down as much as they possibly can, because you don't want to fire a driver.
Right.
Talk about attrition rates.
Yeah.
It's just not something, and especially moving into the early part of 2020, we've got increasing amounts of regulation that's going to, be a lot harder to hire a driver now, especially with all the safety concerns. We've written numerous articles here over the past week or two about the rising insurance costs.
Oh, man.
And the things that, that's legitimately, in my opinion, out of control. And I don't think there's much that carriers can't really do much about this. And it shows in the numbers in terms of.
There's one thing.
We'll get it. I'm going to ask your opinion on just a second. I'll set the stage and then I'm going to let you nail it home. And so, in my mind, there's just not a lot they can do in terms of the traditional methods, if you will, of practicing safety. Some of these technological things can help, but at the same time, the stats are showing that carriers are increasingly safe, but the insurance costs are still going up.
Right.
And a lot of that has to do with the legal ramifications. Their liability is unlimited almost.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that being the case in these legal battles, and again, this kind of, it's back to the old, tort law, civil suit type thing. It's not necessarily that they're being convicted of homicide or anything like that, but a civil court will find these companies liable for, hundreds of millions of dollars of damage. And again, I'm not trying to put like a low cost on life or anything like that, but traditionally people do not treat trucking companies, carriers, like they are, practicing safely.
Right.
Like they just see this big vehicle, and I've been cut off by a truck before, and I get mad at them. But a lot of the times, the court's made up of juries of people like me, or not necessarily that I would be that way, but where all they know in their head is that, they had a truck cut them off one time, and then so they will fine for the defendants, et cetera amounts, which, again, you could get into that whole area of like, how much is life worth? Is this the way that it needs to be, et cetera? But there is no limit on our tort law out there where you can get, that woman that made, and I'm not trying to trivialize the safety segment by any means, but there was the lady that sued for McDonald's for like $1 million in the 80s for the hot coffee. There's almost like there needs to be a cap, because at some point the insurance companies, they don't make money in these situations either.
No.
They just have to charge you enough, and carriers, of course, are their own insurance companies to an extent. They'll reserve a bunch of money back for these things, but there's just not enough that you can reserve or insure for over time where the costs just get too exponential. So that being said, Kyle, let me know, what do you think they should do?
Well, if you can, self-insure. That's the easiest way around it. But unfortunately, most companies aren't in that position. If we think about it from the number standpoint, everybody gives me a hard time, but my favorite stat, 91% of all truck companies are 6 or less.
Right.
Those guys aren't self-insuring. But
now explain what that means.
Which part? 91%?
No,
self-insure. So there are larger companies that have the cash reserves to do it. Start their own insurance company. If you're XYZ Trucking, you open XYZ Insurance and you insure your own trucks instead of paying the premiums to whichever
insurance companies.
Right. If we hold all companies equal, which for the most part they are, like you're saying, for the most part, truck companies are safe. There isn't some huge number of accidents and deaths going on out there. So if you can save some money by not having to pay these exorbitant premiums that we're seeing, this is another area where you're becoming more competitive and more aggressive perceivably in your rates to customers, and you're going to absorb some market share that you're losing out to these other companies.
For sure. And that's effectively what insurance is.
Right.
Is they just take your money and put it in an annuity or put it into some form of investment that they can, or they may even sell it.
Yeah.
And that's how they make their money, is it's basically like a banking function. Like I think most people think that it's just this, they just hold on to your money over time and then they spend it when you get it.
Yeah.
No, they try to make money on your money, and you actually have that same ability to do the exact same thing. They could go to State Farm and just say, hey, I want to invest in your mutual fund instead of paying you insurance.
Yeah.
And then they get the return on the investment, versus, ignoring transaction fees and that kind of stuff. And there's other little details in there. But I know arguably one of the things that we had to do, we were insured and self-insured. We kept money back on reserve. Which is what that is. You're just reserving money for a rainy day for whatever reason. And the government allows you to do that to an extent for, proper GAAP procedures. But that, I think
you get
that
to
is
collect the interest instead of the insurance company, though.
Exactly. You could do the same thing today with life insurance if you wanted to.
Yeah.
There's just, you could actually do it with tax benefit if you were savvy about it.
Yeah.
But again, that's a little bit more tricky. To get into, and I'm certainly not going to play the financial advisor. Not on here. I'm not licensed. So
on this episode of Freightonomics.
But I think that is pretty valuable advice, though. I mean, the fact that you can go out there self-insure, especially smaller guys. The 91% that you mentioned, they don't understand that function. They're not accountants. They're truckers. They're operators. Very good at driving a truck across the road safely. Not necessarily at managing their money.
Right.
And that's, again, back to this whole, how do you weather these type of storms, You have to be financially savvy. And, Kyle, you and I were talking about this earlier about how appears to be, at least from our experience, a lack of interest in the financial side of things. We have a lot of the carriers have a lot of accountants, and a lot of people that are very good with numbers and money.
A lot of invoices.
And a lot of people that are good at making things efficient and smooth, but they're not necessarily interested in taking too many risks or chances. They're not trying to get too crazy with their analytics and try to identify a lot of opportunities out there that may exist, because if you think about it, these guys make 5 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
They just can't afford to take a lot of risks in their day-to-day life.
No, there's very little margin for error in this.
Exactly. But there's still plenty of stuff out there that they can do that isn't that risky. Just like you said, self-insuring, not necessarily that risky. If you're putting the same money back, you have access to the same features that these insurance companies have. You can put that money in the exact same spot, making a return on it. You just have to be disciplined enough to do it.
Proper budgeting, hedging your revenues via freight futures.
Yeah, no, and
it's all there for you.
And again, I'm not trying to be like a commercial, but freight futures are exactly that same type of function for your revenue. It's like revenue insurance, if you will. Yeah. And I can't say that technically, but it's it is not revenue insurance, but it is a way that you can effectively control what your revenue expectation is through a very legitimate feature. And I think that there's enough things out there right now that carriers can take advantage of this. Just think a little bit outside the box. We've got the economy's not dying. It's not going through a recession. We've got the industrial production that is still struggling to get through.
It's lacking.
Is there anything other than some of this defense spending that you see changing here in the near future? I know the new orders has not been great.
So not a lot coming through. I think just that business to business activity. That's what I'm kind of seeing, starting to come online a little bit. I was watching defense spending a little bit closely over the last couple of weeks to see how it's going to shape up this release, but there's not a lot of catalysts really, especially when we're looking at forward-looking indicators like the PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index, not showing a lot of promise. I think consensus estimates are expecting some upward movement in the next month's release. I don't know if they're going to be disappointed once again. But one of the things to note was in the most recent industrial production number, there was a decline, not a surprise. But the surprise is there was an increase in manufacturing slightly for the month. The drastic decline came from because industrial production is made up of manufacturing, mining, and utilities. Utilities really took a huge hit, especially for the warmer weather. And so that really was enough to bring overall industrial production down.
Okay.
But when we're looking at the manufacturing side, there was a nice little blip in December. But
a little glimmer.
But I don't have any faith in it.
Oh, man. Well, and the oil sector has been super confusing.
Yes.
And, I've done a little bit of research on this, obviously not the expert on it like our John Kingston is.
Yes.
But the oil market, especially the global oil market, really tends to push a lot of industrial growth and production, especially in the United States over the last several years as we become a leading producer of oil. And we're seeing something really strange happen, which is the price of oil go down as everybody's expecting it to go the exact opposite direction.
Yeah.
And,
I only smirk because I spent the greater part of my life trading, and it's when everybody thinks one thing, you always want to do the other.
Yeah.
Well, do you have an opinion on why this is happening, or do you know?
Yeah, because everybody thought it was going higher.
Okay. It's just
what do you do when you think it's going higher? You get long, so you start the price move in that direction, and then when it doesn't materialize or there aren't enough people to continue that movement, the opposite happens.
Okay. So it literally could just be a speculation at this point that's driving.
Some of that, if you guys, can we put an end to IMO? Can we finally stick a nail on that non-event?
They keep calling it it's going to eventually show up in the stocks and supplies. And
I know it's an issue in the Pacific.
Right.
I think I read it was close to 100% increase in price for Singapore ports. Yes, but that's going to be no different than anything. That is a legitimate, real-world example of supplies in a particular area. But from a larger scale rollout, anyone who wanted to hedge this ahead of time had ample runway to do it.
They did it.
It wasn't like they announced, hey, guys, in 2 weeks you got to change the sulfur content. I think it's a little overblown. But, yeah, oil prices coming down, that does at least give somewhat of a glimmer of hope for some of these carriers in our little world.
Right.
What was the last ATRI for the average cost to run a truck? Was it $1.81?
Oh, I thought it was $1.65.
$1.69 was the previous one, and then in October they had the update to it, and it went up again.
Oh, wow.
So some relief at the pump, I think, would help some of these guys. If you're getting squeezed on your money coming in is down, and now your money going out is up, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, no, the costs are definitely, they've gone up. Even, again, like you said, the consumer side of the economy is robust. It's the service side is doing great. That means that all of these things that you are paying for are getting their rate increases, whereas all the carriers are giving rate decreases, or they're coming down off of the rates of last year.
Yeah.
And that's going to put a pretty nice little squeeze on your margins, and it looks like it's going to last into early 2020 here, at least for the near term. But we do have some supply side things that may change that here in the future. Especially these people that tried out running their truck for a year, said, you know what, this wasn't what I bought. Yeah. I'm just going to sell this bad boy for about 40% of the cost that I bought it for, and turn in my keys and move on. And I think that's going to continue. I think that's going to be a long-running, the theme of the year is going to be that supply side correction. And inevitably, Kyle, you know that this is going to happen. There's going to be some catalyst that we cannot foresee. We have all the macroeconomic data we want. We have all the information we want. And there's going to be something that basically breaks us out like it did in 2017.
Right.
And the longer that we are in this stable, this flat market, it is without a question, that'll be the harder the breakout will be.
Right.
Because everybody will be lined up with they'll have their infrastructure, they'll have their trucks exactly where they want them, they'll have everything right, as efficient as you possibly can have it. Super tight, because what happens in flatter down markets, everybody cuts costs, get really precise. You see this on the railroads, precision scheduled railroading. The problem with precision is that it is precise, and there is no room for error.
Nope.
You can't fluctuate up or down and expect to have the same result. And so if the market does have a moment out there where all of a sudden everybody's like, you know what, I'm done with this, hurricanes come riding up the Gulf, or, the oil market goes haywire, any one of these little things, black swans, whatever you want to call them, which will happen without fail. It's like predicting an earthquake in California. Right. The market will go into turmoil again. So,
no, 100% agree. I try and make that argument all the time to people that, first, just because we have stopped going lower in price doesn't mean we're going to start going higher. But all of the conditions you would want for a rally are here. We do need a catalyst, but because we've been flat for so long, the velocity of that increase is going to be severe. Yeah.
The longer you're flat to down, the higher that trajectory gets. That stable little line up gradually doesn't exist a lot. So, Anthony, do you have something you want to discuss here at the end as we close out our Freightonomics for this week?
Don't do this to me.
And Kyle can chime in. I know you spent your time alienating most of our audience.
Yeah, and I don't think
hatred of
Kyle would be along my demographic of the same line of thinking, with deep dish pizza being vastly overrated.
We actually talked about this. He's not totally opposed to your line of thought there, but bacon and cheese,
both overrated.
He's a big fan.
Okay, both can't
like most of America.
All right.
Most of the world.
I
really.
like lettuce too, though. But if I had to pick, bacon or cheese are way better than lettuce. But I do agree. I was telling Zach earlier that I live in Chicago, but I have deep dish no more than 5 times a year. Tops.
Okay.
That's
I also
like
put
a
ketchup on my hot
misconception.
dogs.
Wow, I gotta get out of here.
I put ketchup on my hot dogs. Sorry, Mike. I'm sorry. My good friend in Mike, Chicago, he's upset with me right now. But
there's a lot of places that won't even serve you ketchup.
Really?
Yeah. You got to leave to go find ketchup to put on the dog.
Wow.
I'll walk my dog then. I'll walk my dog. I think the most recent one was, I was talking to Zach the other day, and I thought the Jared Leto Joker was highly underrated.
Oh, okay. Here's a perfect question then, since we have a guest. Who was the best Joker and why?
Is this for me to determine?
Anthony, you go first. Who's your favorite Joker?
I think we all know who the best Joker was from The Dark Knight.
Heath Ledger.
Heath Ledger, yes. But I'm putting Jared Leto number 2.
Jared Leto's your number 2. Okay.
I just saw the recently released Joker.
Yeah.
And Joaquin Phoenix, I think, it might be better than Heath Ledger. There's no way he's number 3, for sure.
He did a great job.
I think that
He did a great job.
the issue is Dark Knight's the best of all of those kinds of movies. So I think part of Heath Ledger's great performance gets lumped into the fact that movie's outstanding.
Yeah.
Not that the new Joker isn't, but Dark Knight, that's one of my top 10 favorite movies.
Yeah.
Absolutely instant classic.
The range that Joaquin Phoenix in that charter, that's amazing.
Oh, it was a great movie.
Is tremendous. Now, this is why we were talking about Jared Leto's Joker.
Yeah.
I'm gonna agree with you, and Heath Ledger's number 1 overall, and Joaquin Phoenix killed it. He's my number 2. Jack Nicholson's my number 3. And that saddens me to say because we're talking about 1989.
Yeah.
He
childhood years
just murdered it.
Yeah.
For what all those stuff that came out during that time period and whatnot in the blockbuster side, he killed it. Jack Nicholson made the Joker one of the definitive roles in American movies.
Never rub another man's rhubarb.
He was phenomenal. So it's hard for me to put those two guys because I think that we're in a different. It's like comparing Michael Jordan to LeBron James. It's totally different era. Judged against a different range.
Well, let's pick one. Let's make him singer some people.
Yeah, and but your Jared Leto Joker, I'm sorry, it just
highly underrated. He didn't get enough screen time.
You know what? Harley Quinn, what's her name that played Harley Quinn? She completely
Margot Robbie.
Yeah, Margot Robbie killed it.
She did a good job. Really good job.
Killed it. She was the consummate Harley Quinn. And I'm sorry, Jared Leto. He
needed more screen time. You
murder every other role that you do. And I want to tell you, I want to be like, I want to give him a handicap here because the editors probably had a lot to do with it. And the screenwriters just did not give him the stage that he needed to do that right.
Yeah.
But it just wasn't there. And, he just, maybe he didn't have the opportunity. But there's no way that I'm going to give him a handicap over those other 3.
If his performance warranted, they would have found the screen time.
Yeah.
I'm giving him top 3. Like, I can get Joaquin Phoenix be number 2. I can accept that. I'm giving him top 3.
That's crazy.
Also, real quick, if you want more of Anthony Smith, I tune in this weekend for FreightWaves Radio. I'll be co-hosting with Tim Dooner. One thing we're going to be talking about is the FMCSA said ELDs will make their roads safer, but with fatal crashes up over 5% since their implementation, the agency is conducting large truck crash casual factor studies. And so that's going to be one of the things that we're going to be talking about. Plus, have you been ghosted on a job with a new carrier? Ask a recruiter how to get the most out of your next big signing bonus. Plus, this week in the market data, the phone lines will be open. We want to hear from you. Again, tune in to FreightWaves Radio this Saturday, Sirius XM Road Dog Trucking, channel 146. This is going to be from 3 to 5 Eastern Standard Time. I will be with Tim Dooner himself.
That sounds amazing.
Can I call in and ask about Seinfeld?
Please. I'll have no answers for you.
You know what? If it makes you feel better, I've never seen one episode of Game of Thrones or I can't even think of the name. Breaking Bad.
I've seen Breaking Bad. Okay. Haven't seen Game of Thrones. Haven't seen Friends.
Yeah, me neither. No Friends.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I grew up in the 90s, so I had to watch Friends without any choice. But Game of Thrones, I just binged this year.
Oh, Marianne says Jack Nicholson greater than Jared Leto. Okay, that's enough. That's enough.
It's reasonable, so that's why she had to say it, because yours is unreasonable. Well, thank you, Kyle, for coming on.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, this was fun. Anthony, I'll see you here in a minute. All right, guys, that'll do it for this week's Freightonomics.
We're off. Marianne.
Yeah.
Chime in on that one.
Well, it's crazy that you consider this 5-minute Joker event.
Yeah. Also, Tim Dooner says Kyle Lintner rules the world.